This video is about human nature. How society views human beings strongly influences the social and political life of civilizations. Today's culture war between freedom and social justice is a conflict between two different views of human nature. Is the human being an independent, free being, or merely a social construction determined by the groups we belong to? Society's answer to this question will determine who wins the culture war. Rudolf Steiner wrote The Philosophy of Freedom in the 1890s. By understanding the historical context of this period in history, we can better understand why his ideas of freedom are still relevant today. I have placed the philosophy of freedom on a timeline of the ancient pagan age, the pre-modern age of the feudal peasant, the modern age of the reasoning individual, Rudolf Steiner's ethical individualist, and our own postmodern age of social justice activists. Steiner's freedom philosophy appeared in 1894, before the rise of postmodern thought, and at the critical point in history when new powers of scientific thinking rapidly accelerated the growth of technology. The building of a civilization is strongly influenced by its view of human nature. There are three stages of human development that can be recognized within these periods of history. The states are called the natural being, the social being, and the free being. Quote, "The human being remains in his undeveloped state if he does not take up the stuff of transformation within him and develop himself through his own power. Nature makes a human into merely a natural being. Society makes him into a law-abiding being. Only he alone can make himself into a free being. At a certain stage of his development, nature releases the human being from her chains. Society carries his development a stage further. He alone can give himself the finishing touches. Social and cultural life cannot produce a free being. In the final stage of human development, it is up to the individual alone, by one's own effort, to think and act freely." The ancient pagans were natural beings who lived in harmony with nature. Pagans were in the natural state as creatures of nature with superior instincts and senses necessary to survive within nature. It was the church that called non-Christians pagans. To the church, the pagans were undisciplined heathens, controlled by basic sensual desires. The Catholic Church viewed the pagans as having a sinful nature in need of salvation. The Church taught the doctrine of original sin. The tendency of human nature is to sin. The pagans were sinful, and society is sinful. There is nothing you can do to get out of the sinful state. The only chance of escape is in the afterlife. To convert the pagans to Christianity, the Church told stories of heaven and hell, and how they were sinners in danger of eternal damnation. The peasants obeyed the Church because they were told that the only way to go to heaven was through the Church. The peasants learned how to be meek and obedient to authority. They were told to give up the pursuit of pleasure and instead perform their moral duty to serve the Church and society. The Church legitimized the hierarchical feudal system by teaching that God appointed the Pope and kings. If you were a king, you and your descendants would always be kings. If you were a peasant, the fate of you and your descendants was to always be peasants. This was God's will. The peasants became social beings who learned how to be morally and socially obedient to authority. The priests controlled the peasants' minds, while the feudal lords controlled their activity. Faith in the truths of the Church was challenged by the scientific revolution. The methods of science refuted the Church's teaching that the earth was the center of the universe. The modern age of reason viewed human nature as rational. Viewing the human being as rational by nature was the distinctive feature of Enlightenment thought. The reasoning individual became the foundation for the liberal principles of Enlightenment humanism, including the idea of freedom. Becoming a thinker gives rise to the individual self, the I that thinks. There exists an autonomous thinking self who rises above the natural state by transcending nature. The free individual rejects the religious and social demands of duty and instead obeys only oneself. With the ability to think rationally, an individual learns how to make their own independent decisions and become a self-determined, free being. Rudolf Steiner introspectively observed human nature and discovered something deeper, what he called the free spirit. The free spirit is the purest expression of human nature. Quote, "The concept of man is not complete unless it includes the free spirit as the purest expression of human nature. After all, we are human in the fullest sense only to the extent that we are free." The ethical individualist strives to be fully human by expressing his true nature as a free spirit. Our true nature does not try to be ethical, but is ethical in the sense that it desires to do good, to do what is right. Quote, "What is called the good is not what a person ought to do, but what he wants to do when he expresses his fully developed true human nature. Ethical conduct does not depend on the eradication of a one-sided personal will, but in fully developing human nature." The ethical individualist goes beyond a rational thinker that only draws his ideas from the external world of the senses. The thinking of a free spirit is capable of rising to the intuitive level of universal ideals that inspire ethical conduct, where a person wants to do what he considers to be right. It is not necessary to deny the pursuit of pleasure, or to threaten damnation, or for an authoritarian society to force a person to be good. The inspired ethical individualist loves to strive for idealistic goals. Quote, "Ethical ideals are an individual's own intuitions, the driving forces harnessed by his spirit. He desires them because their realization is his greatest pleasure. He needs no ethics to forbid him from striving after pleasure and then tell him what he ought to strive for. Idealists delight in transforming their ideals into reality." Individualists are self-motivated, or you could say self-empowered, to be ethical because their greatest pleasure is to realize their highest ideals in life. Whenever we are striving to realize our ideals, we are expressing the free spirit. The ethical individualist is on the hero's journey. Success will depend on having a strong enough will to reach noble goals, even though the path is full of thorns. Human evolution reaches its highest point in the noble deeds of the morally free ethical individualist. Quote, "Ethical individualism is the crowning pinnacle of the edifice that Darwin and Haeckel have erected for natural science. It is the theory of evolution applied to the moral life." To summarize, we have the sinful pagan, who is a natural being driven by the urges of nature. The feudal peasant is a social being taught by society to obey the rules and develop an obedient nature. The reasoning individual is a free being able to make their own independent decisions. And the idealistic ethical individualist is empowered to do what he considers to be right by rising to the level of universal ideals. In the postmodern period, the possibility of individual freedom is ignored. The social justice movement rejects the modern age of the enlightened individual and reverts back to the pre-modern view that people are primarily social beings with an obedient nature that conforms to the group. We are all merely group members who conform to the expectations of the in-group and are obedient to the laws and rules of the group. The self is merely a social construct. How we think and act is socially determined by our racial, ethnic, gender, and religious group. Human nature is also culturally determined by living in Western culture. According to social justice social theory of intersectionality, the institutions of Western culture are structured in ways that some groups have more opportunities than others. Western institutions bestow unearned privilege and power to white people, while other groups are oppressed by institutional racism and bigotry. White people have an inherently racist nature for maintaining institutional racism, even though they likely are not even aware of it. People are divided into two groups, the privileged and the oppressed. The nature of the oppressed who have woken to institutional oppression is to be resentful. Viewing the world through the lens of institutional racism takes us back to the pre-modern age when the church believed everyone was born with the stain of original sin. According to social justice ideology, we are all stained by the original sin of being born in Western culture. We are told to be ashamed of our Western heritage that culturally determined us to be racist and bigots. To overcome racism, everyone must submit to the moral authority of the cult of the woke and obey the moral laws of political correctness. Otherwise, we face the eternal damnation of being canceled. The woke moralists demand that disobedient free spirits be censored, deplatformed, publicly shamed, lose their jobs and credit, and even go to jail. There is no escape from original sin, and there is no escape from institutional oppression. The only real escape for the Christian is to die and enter the utopian afterlife in heaven. The only escape for the social justice activist is to tear down Western civilization and enter the utopian afterlife of a new imaginary society free of oppression. To understand the culture war, it is important to know how each side views human nature. If you believe that at the heart of each one's being there dwells a free spirit wanting to express itself, then fighting the culture war is critical.